let's go ahead and get started. I just want to take an opportunity to for everyone on the board to introduce themselves because we haven't been able to meet in person for the past 3 months, and I just want everyone to know who our board members are. So I'll start. Hi, my name's Mandy Yates, and I'm the president of Monroe County Now. Welcome, and thank you for coming.
I'll go. I'm Amalia Schifris, and I'm the communications director for Monroe County Now.
I'm Molly Niebuhr. I'm the treasurer.
I'm Charlotte Forstall. I'm the membership VP. What do we do? Directors, membership?
Director.
Yeah, director. Yeah, membership. If you want to join, let me know. Hit me up in the chat.
Hi everyone, I'm Jess. I'm the director of fundraising.
Yay.
I'm Abby. I'm the vice president.
And Natalia. You're on mute.
Muted.
I'm Natalia, and I am the new secretary.
Yay! And then hopefully Shruti will come on as well.
She's coming in now.
Oh, cool.
Bunch of people just joined, a few more, yeah.
And then Tammy Jo also, she's our communications chair. She writes a blog for us every other week that gets posted to our social media and the website.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'll just go ahead and get started here with a little chapter business. Oh, and also I just want everybody to know, like, I would like to do some sort of check-in with everybody and, you know, see how everybody is doing with, you know, coronavirus and all that fun stuff. So it's a little chapter business. Our LGBTQ plus committee chair has stepped down, Pamela Foey, and she's actually leaving town for a while, which is why she stepped down. So if anyone would like to fill that role, we are all open here. And then also Natalia mentioned that she's our new secretary. Alexa stepped down this week. She has a lot of stuff going on and needed to step away from her duties. So Natalia was kind enough to step in for that role. So thank you very much. We also have a few other committees that if you're interested in being a chair, we would love that. Our Racial Justice Committee is one of them. I mentioned LGBTQ plus rights. And we also have legislative action, fundraising, and membership. So if you're interested in any of those, just reach out to me and I will welcome you. All right, so we actually have a chapter election that is coming up in November, and I know it seems really early to start talking about all of this stuff, but it does come up quickly, and there are bylaws in place that we have to follow. So we basically start asking for people to run for board positions around now and through mid-August or so. To be a voting member, you must be a dues paying member by mid-August, I believe. It's about 90 days before the actual election occurs. And I actually haven't looked at our bylaws recently, but I believe, yeah, that's if you want to run. If you want to vote, I think that we changed it last year so that you could sign up to be a member within 30 days of the election. Anyway, I'm working on a timeline for that. And Tammy Jo has offered to be our election chair this year. I actually haven't talked to the board about that. This is the first they've heard of it. So, but we'll be discussing all of that. And if you are a dues paying member and you would like to help with the election, then just let me know and I will hook you up with Tammy Jo. So speaking of elections, pretty much we've decided that all of our meetings are going to be via Zoom for the rest of the year for the safety of all of our members and friends. So I don't know what the election is going to look like at this point, but just know that it will be electronic. Let's see. And just a couple of things that I've been working on. We did have an April meeting that was scheduled with a woman from Women for Change, which is out of Indianapolis, Rima Shahad. She is part of the Clothesline Project, which is an exhibit that highlights domestic violence victims and survivors. So I have been working on getting her rescheduled, hopefully for this fall, and we'll see how that goes. I'll let everybody know. And then also I'm working on getting a speaker for our July meeting, which will be Sunday, July 19th. That's a tentative date. I've pretty much told all of our speakers that we're very flexible in when we hold our meetings because they are via Zoom and it's not something we have to show up for physically except on the computer. And then there are no August meetings scheduled. We'll come back in September. So I'd like to let the board go around and give us any updates that they have or anything that they're working on. So Abby, would you like to tell us what you have going on?
So I've been working a lot with the kids who started the Enough is Enough B-Town, who organized the Enough is Enough B-Town March. That was only just last week. Oh my goodness. Well, so I've just been kind of helping them, like in terms of giving them support and guidance, and they're like a really dynamic group of people. And so they're organizing a big Juneteenth celebration because a lot of them are up in Indianapolis. So they're working in Indianapolis for their Juneteenth celebration to kind of build community and work in coalition with those organizers up in Indianapolis. So we're also in kind of discussing community conversations around different issues and how to kind of lead the conversation or bring people together to have conversations about that issue. I'm also kind of working tomorrow. Tomorrow there's the Farmers Market Advisory Council meeting, and so a big topic on that agenda is the Broadening Inclusion Group statement that they put out. And so if anyone doesn't remember what that statement said, it had like a lot of, instead of saying like, oh, you know, like we are in solidarity with protesters against police brutality, it's talked about aimless Black people who kill other Black people, and it like felt like a distraction from the main issue, and it obviously got a lot of pushback from the community who said this is not what a broadening inclusion group is supposed to do. So tomorrow is 7 of the members resigned, and tomorrow's meeting is going to be supposed to discuss like basically what happened, and it's a good opportunity to hear from the community about why that statement was wrong at this time, and also about just issues of feeling unwelcome and unsafe at the farmers market in general. Oh, and that meeting's at 5:30 on Zoom.
Thanks, Abby. And in case anybody missed it, we did actually submit a guest column to the Herald Times this past week. And I would really like to thank Shruti and Abby for working on that, and for the rest of the rest of the board for helping edit and get it out. So thank you so much.
Great job on that, everybody. Really good.
Thanks. All right. Oh, actually, there was one thing that I forgot to mention. And Jess, if you'd like to talk about your consultation project that you did for us, that'd be great. Jess is a grad student at IU, and she and a couple of other people worked on a consultation project for our chapter. And I will just let her tell you what that's all about.
Yeah, so for the consultation project, we worked with Mandy. We sat down and, well, it was over the phone because of COVID, and had a couple interviews with her to kind of talk about what she would like to see now become and what some problems there may be in the organization now. A lot of it came back to membership, how to recruit and retain members. So when going through what NOW does and what other Bloomington organizations do, we did a lot of benchmarking to see not only what are other organizations doing well, but what makes them different than NOW and how we can really differentiate ourselves in Bloomington. So we came up with some strategies that, since I'm a member, I can help implement, since we're not going to be doing any in-person fundraisers, anytime soon. So some of the things were updating the website, making it clear to potential new members how they can get involved, what the different committees do, how you can get involved with those, what the board does, how you can understand the difference between being a director or like a committee chair, as well as sending out a survey to understand more who our members are, what the strengths of everyone are, and how we can best utilize those, because learning new skills are great, but when you get to do something that you're already good at to help better your community, it definitely makes it all worthwhile. So those were some of the things that we came up with. And since fundraising is kind of on a pause, those are things that I can continue to work on throughout the year.
Thank you, Jess. And thanks for doing that. Although I will say, if anybody would like to give us money, we will gladly take it.
Yeah, definitely, but
No formal fundraising events anyway. All right, so does anyone else on our board have any updates or anything you'd like to share?
Well, I would say actually maybe a good fundraiser for us right now that we could do is like a week of giving for carry out or something like that, like Middle Way just did with D'Angelo's, because that can be a pretty good chunk of money depending on, the sort of cost of the restaurant, and people are still doing a lot of takeout. And if we could have a restaurant do it like all week, that would be pretty good. Yeah.
For the fundraising things, I have later in the month, I'm going to talk to Becky Wan, who reached out to me about fundraising. We talked about how, at least at the beginning of COVID, maybe fundraising for NOW wasn't the best move, but fundraising for something more related to helping out folks with the coronavirus. So we kind of took a pause to see where the summer was going to lead us. And now, since we have a better idea of what that looks like and what, the world looks like, we were going to talk about some maybe fundraisers like that, but more of like an ongoing thing instead of like, here's an event kind of thing. So we'll definitely look into that.
For various reasons, I'm very much in support of raising money to help more in need issues at the moment, especially.
Right.
There's a long list of reasons why.
Well, we could raise money for, like, say we're doing something and splitting it, like this is for Monroe County now, to split between,
Right.
I don't know, Black Lives Matter and whatever, you know what I mean?
Something like that. I would love to do something like that.
Yeah.
I also don't know if this might just be an idea. I don't know how long Cardinal Stage is going to be doing Cardinal karaoke, but they did this past week. Friday night was like adults karaoke and Saturday was kids, and there were at least 40 people on Friday night. and it was for donations for Middle Way. I don't yet know how much sort of donations raised, but that's also a fun thing. You can invite all your friends. It's karaoke. Who doesn't love karaoke? I mean, some people don't, but you can also just go and watch. You don't have to participate. And there were some awesome drag queens, so that was really fun. Just saying, could be, you know, entertaining, and we could, you know, split it between, you know, I mean, it's like Pride, it's Pride Month, so we could split it between, you know, some Pride organization and like Black Lives Matter, something like that, or COVID, something, you know.
Yeah. Good to know.
Hey, Shruti. Good to see you.
Hi, sorry, I had my video off because there were like undressed children running around behind me. But I just wanted to give a quick legislative action update and ask for questions, or ask a question. And that is, you know, we used to do these sort of in-person meetings where we'd get together and write postcards and make calls and things like that for legislative action. And then we did some reproductive justice events like that as well. And we've been trying to continue doing that by doing a Take Action Now Tuesday, I think as Mandy had mentioned. And also a shout out to Abby, Amalia, and Mandy for putting the graphics and everything together. So what I don't know, so we've been doing that every Tuesday. We've been putting them on Facebook, on Twitter, with scripts and everything. What we don't know is if everyone is seeing them and if there's another way to be more effective, or if people are looking for something where we try to do a Zoom meeting, where we all, you know, we could all just be talking and hanging out and writing out postcards, and things like that, or putting something in the chat about scripts. So I just wanted to see if people had thoughts on that, or if we're being effective in reaching people, just, you know, just because I know I just come across things on Facebook, right? I can't figure out how to get it to give me the information I want. So just a question for everyone. This is the right time for that, right, Mandy? That we're...
Yes, absolutely. So I will just say that about postcards, we actually do have postcards. I don't know if you have them, Shruti, or if I have them.
I have some of them, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So when we've done this in the past in person, we actually provide postcards for people, and they're they have postage on them. And we also usually have stamps and provide scripts and everything. So honestly, like if this is something we do want to do, we can always purchase more. Or if I can get them from you, Shruti, that's good. I'm happy to mail them out to people. Yeah.
We could mail out packages to people who are interested, right? With the stamps and the postcards. And then we could do, whoever's interested, we could gather and do scripts on Tuesdays or whatever day works for people.
Yeah, that would be cool. You could register in advance so Mandy knows who to send it to. And then we could get together and pour yourself your chosen beverage and, you know, do something. I like that.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, if you'd like, if you have those together, I'm willing to run those to people and put them on their doorstep so you're not having to do the postage part, because that could get expensive. So if you've got a little packet you can put in a Ziploc bag and just drop on doorsteps. That's something I can do for you if you want.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I'm happy to do that too. When like in the campaigns and stuff, we would do little Zooms and see each other when we were phone banking. And I really think it brought us together, because then we could talk and like vent also as we did our whatever we were doing.
Yeah.
No, that's really okay. That sounds really fun, actually.
And I have a roll of postcard stamps. So
I have a stack of postcards too from when I used to do
so
postcards
you guys
in
can have
California.
those.
That would be great. Oh, and Charlotte's super prepared too. Okay, so I have the least, it looks like, when I see what you guys are. I wanted to say one other thing, which is that obviously the Indiana legislature is not in session and it's not going to be until early next year. But in the meantime, I think we have this really amazing moment to make all of these local changes. So we could have like local ordinances and proclamations and all these things being passed. And I think that's something we should think about going forward, especially as we see people like around the country sort of building on this momentum of the protest to get laws and policies passed, right? We should be able to do that at our local level too. So just So if people have local issues that you're already involved in, or you're trying to write something like an ordinance or something, let us know and we can do that as well.
So I talked to Steve Volin on Tuesday across from the protests, and he was saying how Jim Sims is going to start leading a conversation and dialogue about like police reform here in Monroe County or here in Bloomington. I think Abby, am I right? Isabel Piedmont Smith today like announced the Zoom, but she didn't post the time yet. But it's Tuesday. It's Tuesday.
Thursday.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I looked. There are two meetings. There's a Board of Public Safety meeting is meeting on Tuesday at 6 o'clock, I think. And then there's a separate meeting, which is the Committee on Public Safety that Isabel announced, and that's 7 o'clock on Thursday.
Okay.
According to
I
the-
don't know. I feel like both of them are valuable.
Yeah.
And we could also do scripts for like the types of things you might want to promote at the meetings if you were to say something, right? You don't have to say the script, but like just here's a position on this or that.
Do we know when summer session starts for the legislative folks? Because there's a couple things like the pregnant worker bill that was supposed to be in the summer session that isn't now. So that could be something that people are writing on because it was supposed to be getting discussed and now they've pulled that. So I'm sure there's other things that fall into core issues that got pulled from the list that maybe we could do. But I don't recall when summer session starts.
I thought that's a great idea. I thought it was August. I'm not sure. But I guess that reminds me, you know, the Supreme Court's abortion and transgender rights decisions are supposed to come out, and basically they only have 2 more weeks when they can issue them, unless they decide to break precedent and do something crazy, which, you know, I would be happy at this point if they did that. So I think we should prepare for those too, because the Indiana legislature is probably preparing, right? So that's another thing they might take up in August. Okay, well, thanks a lot. That was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Shruti. Like, let's just come up with a date for it and we can get it all set up. Does anyone have anything else to talk about? How's everyone doing?
Slowly losing my mind for the 3rd time, but good.
Anyone who's not on the board who'd like to talk about anything or?
Mandy, this is in.
Oh, sorry. Who?
This is Ann McFadden. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's cutting out a little.
This is Ann McFadden. Can you hear me? Sorry. You said something about that you had a speaker for July. Do you have that person lined up yet, or do you have ideas about what the speaker is going to be?
Yes, so I have reached out to, correct me because I know I'm gonna mess this up. Her name is Melanie, sorry, Abby and Shruti know who she is, and she's from NAPAWF, which is a new organization that Abby and Shruti have been working on getting up and running. So if one of you have anything to add.
Anne might know her actually. So her last name is Castillo Colither, and she's also at the Asian Community Center on campus, Asian Cultural Campus.
I just read about her in Bloom magazine.
Yeah, so I've reached out to her to talk about their newly formed organization that focuses on Asian American women, Pacific Islander women, and issues. So hopefully I'll hear back from her and we'll get that posted and invite everybody.
Great.
July is next month. That's,
yes.
Sorry.
Does anyone else?
I'd just like to comment. I was just going to comment that I really appreciate Now's presence in the marches last week. I just was really glad Abby was there and that I could see Now members and lots of women showing out, holding Black Lives Matter signs. And so that was a very moving time for me. And I just appreciate everybody who had a presence there.
Yes, thank you. All right. Well, if we're ready, I'll go ahead and get started by introducing our speaker. Just want to make sure, Megan, that you're on.
I'm here.
Hey,
Hi.
nice to meet you.
You too.
All right, so Megan Stuart is our guest speaker today. Her presentation is called LGBTQ Issues in Indiana, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Megan will discuss LGBTQ plus rights in Indiana. She will talk to us about recent legal victories for transgender Hoosiers, as well as threats to the LGBTQ plus rights locally and nationally. There will be time for Q&A after her presentation. So just to introduce Megan, she is the director of the LGBT Law Project at Indiana Legal Services, where she provides advocacy and representation to LGBT Hoosiers to address the disproportionate rates of poverty and violence. Prior to moving to Indiana, Megan was a senior staff attorney at the Urban Justice Center in New York City, where she provided civil and immigration legal services to homeless and street-involved youth. She received her law degree from the City University of New York School of Law and holds a BA from Antioch College. Please welcome Megan.
Hello, everyone. I think we should just have questions as I'm talking, if that's okay with everyone, because I want this to be interesting and relevant to what you guys are interested and want to talk about. I normally start with the good, but in the last like 24 hours, there's been so much horrible. I'm going to start with it's going to be like an arc. I'm going to start with bad, go to the ugly, and then sort of end with the good. So as Mandy said, I work at Indiana Legal Services. We're a statewide law office that provides free civil legal services to low-income Hoosiers. And I run the LGBT Law Project, where we deal with legal issues for LGBT folks when their fact that someone is LGBT is related to the legal issue. So like if two lesbians are getting a divorce and there's nothing interesting there except that they've broken up, we're not going to do that case. That will go to our regular offices. But if there's a case where two lesbians are getting a divorce and one person is trying to deny custody to the other parent, saying, oh, well, you're not the real parent because you're not the biological parent, or trying to deny that they are the parent even though they didn't give birth to that child, that's the kind of legal issues we'll take. I do a lot of name and gender marker changes, so a lot of the good I'm going to talk about is going to be related to what that looks like here in Indiana. All right, so the bad. The bad, and Shruti mentioned this, that the Supreme Court literally any day now is going to rule about whether or not federal law protects LGBTQ workers from employment discrimination. And that is huge because it's going to also impact discrimination in healthcare and discrimination that trans kids face in school. That's all kind of legally related. And the reason that's especially important and potentially extremely devastating for our folks here in Indiana is there's no state law that protects against or provides that LGBT folks can't be discriminated against. So all we have in Indiana is federal law. And it's not even like Congress wrote a law that said, hey, like, don't be an asshole, like, don't discriminate against people. It's more like this. They said, you can't discriminate based on sex, and what does that mean? And over the last 30 years, courts have said that includes LGBT people for various legal reasons. But there's not a law that says, hey, you can't do this. So if the Supreme Court says you can't do this, we're kind of like shit out of luck. There is a local ordinance in 4 of the 92 counties in Indiana, including Monroe, that prohibits discrimination, but that doesn't really cover a lot of workers here in Indiana. So what does this look like for our clients? What does employment discrimination look like? For some, it's not getting hired after being offered a job when it's discovered that they're LGBTQ. We had a client who was offered a position at a fast food chain, and a mutual his friend had worked there, and the friend randomly said to the manager, oh, hey, I'm so excited that Bob is going to work here. He's one of my oldest friends. And the manager was like, Bob, who's Bob? I only know about Carol. And then as soon as the manager realized the person was trans, he rescinded the job offer. And now we're suing them. It also looks like people not getting promotions. We had a lesbian in Northern Indiana who every single person on her team, she worked in a professional office, got a raise and a promotion except for her, even though she had the highest like evaluations and was always getting rewarded for her productivity. It's also harassment. We see this a lot in particularly for trans women in male-dominated fields, where when they either start to come out or their coworkers suspect that they're maybe transitioning, that there's a bunch of harassment they face that's sort of twofold. Like they face, sorry, my kid is screaming because it is nap time. They face discrimination because they're trans women, and they also face discrimination because they're being perceived as a woman more generally. So they get a lot of just typical sexual harassment that lots of women face at work, like lots of comments and sexualizing them, but then also questioning at the same time whether or not they're really, quote, really women because they're trans, or just being pushed out of their job because their working conditions are made really terrible. And this is especially hard for trans people now when there are so few jobs, right? So it's like a lot of our clients are, if they can get a job, are facing this question of like, do I stay somewhere where I'm being harassed every single day and not do anything about it because I'm so desperate for work? Or do I quit and hope that I can find another job? And so that's really hard. And there's been lots of national surveys and local surveys about how prevalent discrimination is. And the last nationwide survey about trans folks here in Indiana, 73% of respondents said that they were harassed at work, and then also were harassed in schools. And so there's a lot of research, and I can send resources about the links between harassment that kids face in schools and harassment adults face at work, and the links between, you know, the school to prison pipeline and the over policing of not only people of color in school, but also gender nonconforming kids, which is then even worse for like trans girls of color, and how all of these things are related. Do you guys know about the Supreme Court case that is any day now going to be decided? All right, so it's actually, I'm going to read the letter so it's about this woman, Amy Stevens, who was a funeral director. And I'm going to just read the letter she wrote to her coworkers because I think it's really beautiful. And so she said, "Dear friends and coworkers, I have known many of you for some time now, and I count you all as friends. What I must tell you is very difficult for me and is taking the courage I can muster. I'm writing this to both inform you of a significant change in my life and to ask for your patience, understanding, and support, which I would treasure greatly. I have a gender identity disorder, which I have struggled with my entire life. I have been in therapy for nearly 4 years now and have been diagnosed as a transsexual. I have felt imprisoned in a body that does not match my mind, and this has caused me great despair and loneliness. With the support of my loving wife, I've decided to become the person that my mind already is. At the end of my vacation on August 26, 2013, I will return to work as my true self, Amy Australia Stevens, in appropriate business attire. I realize that some of you may have trouble understanding this. In truth, I've had to live with it every day of my life, and even I do not fully understand it myself. I have tried hard all of my life to please everyone around me, to do the right thing, and to not rock the boat. As distressing as this is sure to be for my friends and some of my family, I need to do this for myself and for my own peace of mind, and to end the agony in my soul. I have learned that life is an adventure and would like to believe that the best is yet to come. And I hope we can enjoy it together. It is my wish that I can continue my work at RG and GR funeral homes doing what I've always done, which is my best." So she sent this letter. Shortly thereafter, the owner of the funeral home fired her because she was no longer going to represent herself as a man and wanted to dress as a woman, which would violate God's commandments. She sued them for employment discrimination, and she won every level of the process. She won. But now it's at the Supreme Court, along with a couple other related cases, where they're going to decide whether or not law that bans sex discrimination includes trans people. And legal experts who are much smarter than I am are all sort of bracing for the worst, to have the Supreme Court say, no, sorry, like we don't care about you. And this is not just bad for employment discrimination, but this is related to what something Trump did on Friday. Is they announced that during a pandemic in Pride Month that they're changing how they interpret part of the Affordable Care Act rule related to discrimination and healthcare. And so under Obama, there was a really broad, inclusive rule that told healthcare providers like essentially how to treat trans people, which is as people, and to not discriminate them, and gave really great guidance. It's like, use the pronouns that someone uses in their medical records. You have to have lactation rooms can't be sex segregated because trans men have babies, and you have to have facilities open based on gender identity. The Trump administration announced that they are changing that. They're removing explicit protections that help trans people, and they also are encouraging discrimination. They're basically saying you should use the sex someone was assigned at birth in all of their medical records and use every decision based on that, and don't bother using the pronouns someone uses for themselves. And this is really terrible. And part of why this is related to the Supreme Court is, the law that this is based on. So like Congress passes a law, and then the administrative agencies interpret what that means. They like work out all the details. The Trump administration can't take away protection that's in the law, but the way that the law is interpreted is related to these Supreme Court cases. So if the Supreme Court says sex doesn't cover LGBTQ people, then this really gives free rein for healthcare discrimination, because on the back end of the law, it's all sort of tied together. It doesn't impact state and local protections, but here in Indiana, we don't really have that. So, someone in New York City, if the gays, if we lose at the Supreme Court and this rule is in place, they're fine, because at every level, there are these laws that protect people in healthcare and discrimination. But here in Indiana, we don't have that, which means that there's going to be just huge license for discrimination, and then no remedy for folks when they face it. And we already can see that when there's not explicit protections for folks in healthcare, people don't access healthcare as much as they should because they fear for discrimination, or we see really adverse health outcomes because they're being mistreated by a doctor and misdiagnosed, and just, I'm not going to go into that. It's like a whole other thing. So it's bad, right? Like it's not great. And then next week it could just get so much worse. And I think this is where the people who do legislative advocacy and community organizing are really going to have their work cut out for them to figure out, what do we do for folks here in Indiana? My organization, we don't do any legislative advocacy because we're funded by the federal government and we're not allowed to. But, folks like you or the ACLU is really going to have to figure out, what's next? Like, how do we help people and make sure that there's like sort of basic dignity? Any questions about that? I feel like I was talking really fast.
If you have ideas or things you could share with us on what to do, I think that would be really helpful for us, especially things that are Indiana focused or focused on different communities, right? Because the impact on people who are homeless, for example, might be different. And any of those types of things I think would be really, really helpful for us. I moved here less than 2 years ago from like a very blue place to a very red place. So I'm still understanding sort of the depths of the conservativeness of our legislature that is really surprising of someone who came from New York City. Like last year, the BMV announced that they were going to issue non-binary driver's license, which is great. It's really good for people. And then like immediately the legislature was like, oh no, you don't do something good. We're going to take care of that. And it got defeated. But I don't know, ideally you just propose legislation that would be really helpful. But I feel like in Indiana, like, can you do that? I feel like it's really just, we're so
often on the defensive and trying to kill really bad bills, that there's, I don't know, I haven't seen, at least from the ACLU, who we partner with a lot, you know, it's like they don't even get to introduce the bills they want about LGBTQ issues because they're so busy, like cutting back all the bad stuff. Like last year, there's a bunch of really bad bills that were introduced about like high school athletics, you know, just really like enshrining discrimination against trans kids, particularly trans girls in high school sports. And so I don't have those ideas, but I would love to see what you all do so I can be inspired and not so down on the legislative process.
I have one idea, but it's a downer. So it's just, you know, depending on what the Supreme Court does, a lot of the case. So first of all, I think we should be supporting all of these to support people's human rights for everybody and support everyone's human dignity, right? But the Supreme Court cases that they're thinking about that talked about discrimination on the basis of sex, a lot of the ones in the 70s and 80s were brought by straight white women who people felt were acting too ambitiously or aggressively at the workplace. And so they were discriminated against and not promoted to partner, not given pay raises, that kind of thing. And if the Supreme Court overturns those, that's going to affect straight white women also in the workplace, right? Because it'll overturn those, or at least in some part. So maybe framing bills or like framing legislation or bills to say, hey, even if you overturn LGBTQ rights, you still have some basic protection for, you know, for sex, right? And this is how we're going to say it's unconstitutional or something, or letting people know it affects a lot more people than they might think. I still think that's a downer because I don't think we should be forced into those maneuvers, right? I think we should be, again, fighting for everyone's rights, not like the lowest common denominator or something. But
I feel like often like both the legal process and the legislative process are always about the lowest common denominator and who's like this ideal perfect plaintiff that everyone thinks is like sympathetic and deserving, which is gonna be like in the like racist legal system, like a white person, rather than maybe the like someone who would represent more identities.
I know I'm new. Can I say something? Is that okay? I also wonder if the state of Indiana would even care that they're taking away women's rights, because they don't seem to. So while I appreciate like relating it to people that maybe they care about, I don't know that women will get the job done either, because I don't think our legislators care about that either, unfortunately.
Yeah, like I was really surprised that pregnancy discrimination didn't pass, because I was like, who doesn't like a pregnant lady? Like, you know. But yeah, so it's all very, you know, like I feel as a lawyer who does this work and we do employment discrimination cases like every, you know, twice a week or once a week, depending on the schedule, we're just like frantically waiting to see, is like our whole legal world gonna crumble? But really this is, yeah, I'm not going to go into how this, so as you were saying, like there's other people like someone who's not working or can't get a job because maybe they don't quote pass as well, or like they're just not employable because of their criminal record. Like this, in some ways, like this is for a chunk of like the LGBT community, not having these explicit employment discrimination protections aren't going to change the reality that they're sort of forced out of the like, you know, the like on the books workforce and are going to be, you know, engaging in sex work or other sort of street-based activity to make money because they can't even enter the like quote legitimate workforce anyway. I'm just going to talk briefly about the ugly, which is that, you know, there have been all these protests recently about, you know, George Floyd and Black Lives Matters, and I think part of what we see is that all of the racism and discrimination and transphobia and gender discrimination that we see all over is amplified when we look at trans women of color. You know, in the United States this year already, there have been 14 documented cases of trans people being brutally killed, and 11 were people of color and 12 were women. And I think that's really shocking when you really see how all of these systems of oppression like are interplaying. It really just plays itself out on the bodies and lives of trans women. I read something recently that the average life expectancy of a Black trans woman is 35 years, which is horrendous. And I think this is a great undercount because, you know, a lot of people won't report crimes to the police because the police are the worst, and there's a lot of mistrust and violence from the police to trans folks. And also in the media, a lot of misgendering. Like there was a trans man in Florida who was killed by the police, Tony McDade, and he was misgendered in almost all of the local reports is just like not a trans man. And I think it's important for the media to, you know, like if the media is misgendering people, there's all these cases we maybe don't know about because someone hasn't had a legal name change and stories are just reporting their birth names, which newspapers love to do. When Amy Stevens, the woman at the center of that Supreme Court case, she passed away recently, and the New York Times tried getting her lawyers to tell them her birth name, which is irrelevant to anything. And so newspapers love to do that. If you haven't had a legal name change, we have to publish your real name or your birth name, which I think is then outs people. And there's all these problems related to that. I'm going to talk about the good. I went through the bad because I feel like the bad for trans women are the bad that lots of, marginalized and oppressed communities face, but it's really just remembering that this happens to trans women at really exorbitant rates. At one point, the US was the most deadly place for transgender women. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, which is staggering considering how there is lots of violence against trans women in many pockets of the world. I used to be an immigration lawyer, and it was, if we had a client who was a trans woman from certain countries, we'd be like, oh, this is a slam dunk case because there's lots of documented violence against people. But the reality is, if there are always these articles about a trans woman from the US trying to get asylum in Canada, because really the US is the most dangerous place for trans women. And a lot of that is because of police violence against trans women. All right, so I'm gonna talk about the good. And this is, the bulk of our work is in the good. So the law in Indiana, as I said, for LGBT folks isn't really good, but it could be so much worse. And there's one bright spot in Indiana, and that is our Court of Appeals, which is, if you go to court and you see a judge, they do whatever they're going to do. And if you don't like that, you can appeal to this higher court. They're like this in-between court, and they can say to the judge, hey, what the hell is wrong with you? Why did you do that? Or they can say to you, shut up, the judge was fine. And so our intermediate court is actually pretty awesome when it comes to cases about trans folks. And the way that plays out is for name and gender marker changes. So a lot of what I do, and the number one issue for a lot of trans people when they're first coming out, is getting a legal name and gender marker change, which allows them to update their name and gender marker on all of their IDs. So on their birth certificate, on their driver's license, bank records, all of that stuff. And that's really important because if you think about every time you use your ID, if the name, if your gender presentation doesn't match the name on the ID, there's a huge potential in that moment for violence and discrimination. So if I'm at the store and I buy a bottle of wine and I have to show my ID to prove that I'm over 21, that's we use our IDs all the time. And every time you show your ID, there's this moment and this potential for violence. So name and gender marker changes are super important, both for people to have their identities validated, but also to be able to move through the world a little more safely than they otherwise would. So name changes, you go to court and then you run around to all these agencies, and then when it's all done, hopefully all your identity cards, your identity documents match your actual name. And so in this way, in the court process, Indiana has actually pretty decent laws. There's states with much worse laws about name changes. Like in New York, where I used to live, if you were married, you had to get consent from your spouse to get your name changed because it's the 1800s there. But here in Indiana, it's a really straightforward process, which is great. But the problem is when our clients go to court with really conservative judges who don't believe that trans people deserve protection under the law. So I'm going to just read some quotes of things that judges have said on the record, right? Court hearings are all recorded. So these are things they've said on the record to my client's face and to my face. When we've gone in to say, hey, like Jane Doe wants to change her name, her birth name is John Doe, but she's a trans woman, just change her name. Normally that's a really simple process, and you just have to show you're not trying to defraud anyone. So if I was like going into the court and I said, I want to change my name to Mandy Yates because I want to steal her identity and like open 100 credit cards, a judge is going to be like, yeah, no, you can't do that. But if I say, I want to change my name to John because I'm trans, like that's a good enough reason, and it sort of ends there. And there's also some protections for folks to keep the records of all of that private so that someone can't go on to the court website, which has all of the court cases that are public, and see that one time I changed my name and see that I'm trans and see all this really intimate personal information about me. And so in these court processes, which should be very simple, you know, in Monroe County, if I do a name change that takes more than 5 minutes, it's because the judges and I are chit-chatting, right? Like it's a really easy, straightforward process. But this is what happens in some other counties in Indiana. So a judge said, this was actually in a written decision. He said, my client's actions, dress, and demeanor profess to all that he/she is transgender. It is not a secret or private diagnosis. It is readily apparent to anyone in the public. I understand that from previous statements that he's gone, she's gone, whichever, through procedures that make her look more like a male, but that doesn't prove to me that they are actually a female or male. It proves to me that it's a female that now looks more like a male than a female. It doesn't make them, with the evidence I have, a male. Just because he identifies or she identifies as one or the other, it doesn't mean that there's any evidence that that's what they are. And then I had an exchange with the judge and I was like, I don't know what more you need than my client saying he's male. If you saw him on the street, you would be like, oh, there's a dude. Like he has a deep voice, he has this big beard, things that shouldn't be relevant. But I was pointing out that like my client looks nothing other than like a 25-year-old dude walking around. And then the judge said in response, I've got an aunt that has a significant amount of facial hair too. That doesn't make her a male. And so we have these, right? This is what they're saying, like on the record. Like, I don't know what they're thinking in their head. Like this is their filtered version of whatever it is they're thinking. So we have this happen, and then we go to this higher court and we're like, hello, please, judges, clarify that our trial courts should not be assholes to people who are trying to get a name change. And our Court of Appeals, over and over again, in the last, I think 18 months, we've had 3 really great decisions from the court that say that they read this and they essentially like publicly shame the judges and saying, you're not allowed to treat people that way, that the trial courts need to show far greater respect and objectivity and impartiality to everyone who appears before them. And so even though we have these things happening, the Court of Appeals is publicly saying, like, you can't do that. Like, this is not how you treat people. This is not what the law says. In some cases, they have to say to judges, you can't invent law and invent procedures that you want people to jump through just so you can say or deny this case. Like, you can't make up the rules. That's not your job. And it works. Like, that public shaming works. Like, so we've had the last decision where the judge kept calling my client it, and with the facial hair, that decision worked. We had another case in that county and they just did exactly what they were supposed to do immediately. And they said, like, I'm doing this now because the Court of Appeals told me to, which is great, right? Like, if judges don't want to follow the law, we at least want them to feel pressured and shame into just doing it so that they don't get embarrassed by their colleagues. Also, the Court of Appeals is pretty decent. They've had some really interesting, good decisions that benefit certain immigrants in the last year, which is someone who had like a very negative view of Indiana before moving here. I was really surprised about, and that happened again just a couple weeks ago, where a judge in Indianapolis, who's like a actually a pretty decent judge, said that she couldn't grant a name change for our client because he was not a US citizen. And so we did an appeal, and the Indiana Court of Appeals said, no, there's not a, the law is written, you've met our legislators, the law is written, the name change law, a little bit unclear and by people who maybe don't know what they're doing all of the time. And so there was some confusion in the law that made it look like you had to be a United States citizen to get a name change, but then the higher court was like, nope, you don't. Even though I think a lot of people would expect courts in Indiana to very eagerly close the door to immigrants trying to access something. So that's our good. Like we get this, and it's really important because there are some places where if you don't have this higher court on your side, you don't have much. Like I'm going to read you a quote from the Fifth Circuit, which is not where we live. A judge who was there's a case for a transgender prisoner, and this is what he says when she asked that she be referred to with female pronouns in the court's paperwork. The judge, he's a Trump appointee, he said, "We decline to enlist the federal judiciary in the quixotic undertaking of using preferred pronouns." So if you have a judge who's like refusing at the minimum to even acknowledge that someone is a woman or is a man, you're going to get really bad case law for people. But here in Indiana, or at least our higher court, really recognizes the dignity of trans people who are appearing in front of judges, which is great. I know people.
There are a few questions that we have in the chat. If you'd be okay with us asking.
Yes. Do you want? I didn't even see the chat.
Oh, it's okay. You have
Okay.
to click on it. But Tammy Jo was asking about something that you had mentioned earlier. Do you mean wording things like universal human rights? And I don't know, Tammy Jo, if you want to.
Oh, it was, Shruti was talking about, we might have to reword things in sort of this sneaky way. And I was wondering if that meant focusing on universal human rights versus discrimination against gender or sex or sexual orientation. I mean, does that mean we just go to instead of listing out the ways that people can be discriminated against, just going to the straight out, no, humans get human rights? Or is that an even harder fight? I don't know. Which is a harder fight, frankly. I don't think either should be a hard fight. But then there's reality. So what is the reality, which is the harder fight? That was really my question there.
I can give Megan a chance to read and respond, I guess. I was thinking, yeah, that is what I was thinking. I think universal human rights would be harder or just as hard possibly, or, close to as hard. But I feel like with the abortion stuff, we've been really successful in putting people on the defensive by using libertarian language, liberty and deprivation of liberty, and making it sound like it's like a deprivation of liberty for everyone. Like it is, but just making that clear. So that was just one idea.
Yeah, I still have I'm happy not to have to think about policy advocacy one bit. I feel like you need to have a lot of, I don't know what the right word is. You have to be able to not swear at legislators to do that work. And I'm not made that way. There was a comment about voting rates. I have no idea about voting rates. When I send out, after I help someone get their name and gender marker changed, I send a big packet. It's like step-by-step guides about how do you update your birth certificate, how do you update your social security card, all of that. And we also include something about how to update your voter registration. We can't tell people to go vote because of the federal rules that govern where I work, but I can tell people how to update their information. And if they're not registered, then they can think, oh, I can go register to vote. And trial court judges are elected, but what we find really interesting is the judges who are the worst are in very Republican counties. Like one of the judges we had was in Newton County, which is, if you're driving to Chicago, it's where all the wind farms are. It's a county of 15,000. And I think that public shaming is hard when the base is not going to see the shame, right? That like if the Joe Schmo is like, well, of course that person isn't really a man, like how do you shame? Like shaming only works if your base sees the shame and doesn't condone your activity, your position. And we had that too. We had a judge down in Orange County, and we were talking about, do we do some kind of public shaming campaign? But we don't think that it would work. But I think we're going to make some formal disciplinary complaints against judges who do this, and hope that there's some negative professional consequence for them. And there are lots of good judges, every time we get a good case in the Court of Appeals, when I'm in really progressive counties or even small counties who judges just think their job is to follow the law and to treat everyone with respect, even if they're maybe conservative in many other ways, or always talk about how appalled they are about how other judges are acting. And I don't know what kind of, they have judicial conferences, which is last year when those two judges from Clark County got shot and then arrested. They have these judicial conferences. And so I don't know what happens behind closed doors, if, all of the really conservative judges scheme to find other ways to screw people, or if there's like some kind of like peer pressure to maybe just like, don't do that anymore. Are there any questions people have?
I have a question, and you might get to this if you haven't, if you still have stuff to talk about. But I was just wondering, do you have any idea what the Indiana legislative session might look like in 2021? Have you heard about any legislation they might want to pass?
No, but if I had to guess, I think they're going to try to pass legislation that defines male and female, or defines sex as being only male or female, to prevent non-binary driver's licenses and birth certificates. We got the BMV to issue that like March of last year. There was a huge backlash, and then the BMV decided to try to go through this administrative process they made it look like change, like not let people get non-binary IDs, but that actually, like, I opposed it, but so did the religious right. Like, it was this weird, where they were like, no, people can only be male or female, it's bad. And I was like, this is bad, because like it should be more liberal and not more restrictive about the process. They did that in the hopes to like not have the legislature try to make a law that really restricts what they can do. That went through this whole process where Curtis Hill was like, I don't like what you've done. And then BMV was like, okay, we'll do it again. And they did the whole thing again. And Curtis Hill was like, I still don't like what you've done. And they're like, okay, but we don't understand why. And then he issued an advisory opinion at the request of a legislator earlier this year that it's really an amazing piece of like legal vomit. It makes like kind of no sense, but I think what they're trying to say is that under Indiana law, sex is binary, so it's only male or female, and so you don't have authority to issue non-binary IDs. And I think based on that opinion, someone's going to introduce something to try to really like codify that, to say like, yeah, it's only male or female. Because right now Indiana law doesn't define sex, it doesn't define gender, and they're both used interchangeably in all of these different parts of the law, which is really useful for my arguments when I'm saying to a judge or to an agency, hey, like there's nothing that says you can't do this, and actually like it's not defined, so like why not define this in a way that like gives the most people access to accurate and affirming identity documents. And then I think, like this year, the legislative session was like pretty awful. I deleted the things from my presentation that were the bills that were pending earlier this year. But I think that my guess is a lot of those are going to, at least in the LGBT context, are going to come back. Let me just pull it up. So athletics, and then there's a bunch of bills that would prohibit gender affirming healthcare for transgender youth, and then impose either criminal or child abuse penalties for any adult or doctor who engaged in that. We saw that in some other states. And that includes giving trans kids puberty blockers. I don't know if people know what that is. So basically, if you have a kid who's like, I think I'm trans, you can give them puberty blockers, which sort of stops their development. And then if they decide that they want to, or their parents decide, depending on their age, that they want to go on hormones, they can do that, but then they don't have these secondary sex characteristics developing while they're making that decision. It's sort of like a pause. Or if the kid decides like, hey, maybe I'm not trans, like I don't want to go on hormones, they can go off of it, and then their development continues as it otherwise would. And there's some, like, I think it was Tennessee, there was some state that was like, we're gonna just make the worst anti-trans bill and just throw sort of everything in together. And I think that these will all come up again. Like, they were defeated this year. The ACLU did a great job on the back end of like not getting these things to the floor, but I don't know, it seems like there's always these trends that like sweep the nation of like, oh, well, if Nebraska can say that a school has to call DCS if a kid says they're trans and their parent is supportive, then why can't we have that thing here too?
Do you think it will get a lot worse depending on who is elected president and the election results, or could it possibly also get better depending on who is elected?
I mean, I think that's sort of like the trick with electoral politics, is that like it can get better in some ways and then worse in others. Like under Obama, there was lots of really good, they used their power to interpret law in very positive ways for trans people. Like they clarified what do trans students, what are they entitled to, and what in the healthcare context does discrimination look like, and really vigorously fought employment discrimination. But then at the same time, I was working with trans youth, but also I was an immigration attorney, and like some terrible things were happening in that world. Obviously, it's gotten a lot worse under Trump, but for me personally, like I'm going to take off my ILS hat. Like electoral politics will never save us, and that's never going to be the answer to our problems. And like a new president isn't going to fix racism or transphobia, but can it make these like little material things better? I think always. And put my hat back on.
Something you said earlier did make me think, and I know you said that you're like not really like about like maybe like writing legislation or anything or doing that, but we just had our primary, and we won't have a general in the majority of our district, right? So like we have people who are running in harder districts that are adjacent, but like really us, Matt Pierce and Shelley are pretty much won their election. So it just makes me think that maybe it's time to push Matt, just because he's been here for so long, right? He's been our elected representative in the House for so long that maybe I can't commit to this cycle because into 2020, because I'm so involved in state races and helping people get elected for next session. But definitely 2021 is like an off year. No local, state, or federal, besides our party chair, but we can't really vote for that anyway. So maybe it would be something good for our chapter to kind of think about, like pushing our representative to make more of a stand. He's always voted correctly, but maybe like really kind of more aggressive kind of legislation, because even if it fails, even if we are, because right now we're just fighting to like break the supermajority, which is really sad, right? So it's like we're not even trying for a majority. We're trying just to break the super majority. So, but we need to start chipping away at some of these awful state laws. And even if we can't do it, we need to start trying, right? And maybe that looks like forming coalitions across the state so that by 2022 we can get closer. Because nothing's going to happen if we're just like, well, we have a terrible state legislature, and you know what I mean? So
I think that makes a lot of sense. So not in my ILS hat, but as like Megan Stuart, voting citizen of Bloomington, I like emailed Pierce, like for over 2 issues, like a call to action. One was about reproductive rights, and the other was about this like awful bill about gender markers. And when I did it about the reproductive rights, I got a great auto reply that was like, yes, like I will always fight for the right of Hoosiers to choose. Whatever he said, I was like, oh, you're okay. I like that. But I got no auto reply like affirming that like about an LGBTQ issue. And so I think he could have there could be a real potential there. But again, he voted correctly. It's just.
But I think it's time to be more brave.
Yeah. I
mean, he represents probably the bluest district in the state in terms of progressive Bloomington, but I think we need to start asking our people to be more brave.
Yeah, I totally agree with Natalia. And I was thinking about what you were saying about the ability to shame people. And I think that you're right. In sort of small microcosms, we can't shame people because they'll be proud of like whatever we're trying to shame them for. But I feel like when you think about some of these people sound, from the quotes you read, they sound so awful that like, I feel like no rational person can like not see what's there. And I feel like people have been successful with shaming people like that by ratcheting it up to a state or national level. So like people like Steve King, like once the National Party had to respond to how awful he was, he got pushed out. And then I was reading about Roy Moore and Doug Jones, and apparently everybody in Alabama knew what Roy Moore was doing all along. And so that's why it was so easy for national media to come in and put together the story. But as soon as it became that story, there was like this pressure on him and people were somewhat embarrassed to vote for him, right? And I think we could do that with some of the judges too. And also I think there's a little bit more room for pushing for better judges to be elected, because my understanding is like by the time you get to the judge elections, like barely even like 10% of the people even vote for a judge. So if you got even like the 10% of like the people in the most conservative area to vote, it could swing it, right? Or like make it a tough battle and make them spend all their money, right? Or something, right?
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about that, but that's true. We try to pitch these victories to like national media just to try to like increase the pressure on judges, but it's hard. Like oddly, people are not that interested in in covering these things. We got some national press coverage about the like hubbub with non-binary IDs, but not as much as I think, because it's like things are so much worse in other places, or like it's not like this shining model of like California about how to really do things right. But we always want to, like we have a PR person who's always sending press releases out.
Hey Megan, have you worked with Adam Wren?
No.
Okay, I'll email you about that. But he is out of Indy, and he's always in Holcomb's like Monday, Wednesday, Friday press conferences. But he writes for Daily Beast, and Politico picks up some of his stuff too.
Oh yeah.
So he's like, and he like will throw it, like it doesn't matter your party affiliation, he will come for you. So,
that would be great. There's some sympathetic, no, let me rephrase that. There's one sympathetic journalist in Indy who will cover our clients' cases really well. And there's this woman out of Fort Wayne who covers issues, and I think she would say she's like a neutral journalist, but maybe privately thinks that she supports LGBTQ issues. But the way all of her articles are is she gives a lot of space to the religious right and frames her issues sort of around their talking points. And I've emailed her to be like, why do you keep doing this? Like these people, like don't let them frame your issue. Like, frame the issue however you want. Don't give them so much space. So having more press, even that just like doesn't distort what the issue really is always helpful. I have nothing else on my agenda.
If I can jump in kind of to piggyback on Natalia here, I think one of the problems with getting people to vote for judges is it's really hard to learn about the judges. Like, a lot of times, a candidate running for state representative, city representative, county representative, they have like a website and stuff, and the paper will ask them questions, but I was noticing the paper barely covers anything about people running for the elected judgeships. And I don't know, I mean, we could put pressure on various local and county and state news sources to cover that more, but my guess is they would claim that people aren't interested. But I think people aren't interested because they don't have access to the information. If they knew what was going on, if they knew what these judges said and did, then maybe we'd learn more about them.
Hey, Tammy Joe, it's Ashley here. I've got my video turned off because internet hates me. The reason why you're not seeing things on judges is because they are so restricted in what they can and cannot publicly say because of the role they're running for. So there's a lot of things they can't answer, which is why you don't get to see a lot from them, which does make it really hard for us to know where they'll stand on certain things. But that's the biggest reason why you're not seeing that kind of information out there. And once they're elected, you won't hear from them again or see them again because they can't do anything that is viewed as partisan. So it gets really difficult.
But you can, so I do a lot of, I'm like an expert Googler. And so when I'm in a new county, I serve all 92 counties. So pre-COVID times, I put almost 10,000 miles on my car last year, traveling around to court hearings and outreach clinics. So I go to these small counties and I'm like, who is this person? There's a lot of information you can find online, even though they don't maybe have like a candidate website. If you go through the court, Indiana, which is a double-edged sword, has an mind-blowing amount of information publicly available on the internet. You can look up marriage licenses, you can look up, almost all court cases are publicly available, except if there's a few exceptions. And all of the appellate decisions are easily accessible online. And so when I'm looking for judges, especially if they're up for re-election, you can see, have they been overturned? What kind of decisions do they have? And there's lots of ways, if you are interested in how they rule on a particular issue, that you can, spend time doing that. So like if I go to a new county, I can type in and look at every name change case that they've done and click on it and see, what are they doing? Are they routinely denying, let's say, fee waiver requests to trans people, or are they just deny, there's a way to see how they act on certain issues, but it is really difficult.
Yeah, I just want to say I totally agree with all of you, and I see an opportunity here because, like, when I was voting, like, I'm a lawyer and I was trying to find information on them, and it was so hard. And the two pieces of information I had were which judges deny requests from minors to seek abortions. And then I looked up their bios and I crossed out anybody who bragged about things like being part of the Boy Scouts or something, right? Like, it was such little pieces of information. But as you said, all of their rulings are public information and their opinions are public. And we could look at them, or at least identify, identify some of this information and provide the information at least to NOW members, or or give it to our NOW PAC, and our NOW PAC could decide if they wanted to endorse people or not. But I feel like that's a lot of opportunity. And part of the reasons the judges say these really awful things in their opinions is because they think no one's listening and no one's going to read them. And if they know people are, that's an opportunity, I think. And Natalia's really good about tweeting about stuff like that, so she could totally embarrass them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so it's for judges seeking re-election, it's so much easier because also all judges, not all, but almost all judges have bios on their court website. So there's a judge up in Fort Wayne who until recently, like, refused to issue gender marker change orders, even though the law basically said he had to. And his bio, right, we're like, who is this guy? Like, why is he such a jerk? His bio, blah, 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 proud member of Knights of Columbus. And so we're like, okay, that's why you're not going to do this. Or, you know, judges will say if they're on a board of their church, and you can Google the church to see if that church has like a lot of public facing opinions about trans people or gay people, or have like a conversion therapy group.
I may just be kind of curmudgeon-y since I'm an ancient historian by training, but I think by and large, one of the big problems with democracy is that the bulk of people tend to be followers and want things handed to them easily. And so that's my concern here, is that I don't think enough people are going to investigate. And maybe it's a good thing then they don't vote for judges if they're not going to take their time and try to look at them. But I wonder how many people are being told by organizations they're part of, yeah, we want this judge. Yeah, we want these judges. I'm pretty sure they are, because then, I mean, obviously when a political party gets into power, I'm sure they have lists of people they would like to promote to judgeships when they have the ability to just appoint people. So they have to have that information. So I'm not saying now should do it, because we have so many things that we do, but I was just wondering, are there organizations out there who watch this sort of stuff that maybe we could kind of push their information out to? The people who look towards now, we could like say, hey, this watchdog group is talking about these things. And, you know, because I'm pretty sure we don't have the staff to like do all this stuff, you know.
I think there's a lot of national groups that look at this, especially in the criminal legal system context and like racial disparities in sentencing. There was like a meme going around. I don't know if it's called a meme, if it's just like an infographic. I don't know what the youth call these things. Just, you know, like about the racial disparities in sentencing in just one courtroom, identical crimes, person with sort of identical criminal histories, and how, you know, the African-American person was like sentenced to 5 times what the white defendant was. And so I think at least in that context, there's lots of organizations like the Marshall Project does it. I don't know at the local level, you know, how that works, but there's lots of, you know, IU students are going to be kind of bored if there's like going to be social distancing. There's not going to be as many parties. You know, maybe people could just spend some time looking at data.
Oh, for sure. I actually, speaking to that infographic, I shared about it this week on my page. There was this infographic going around. The black guy got 26 years for armed robbery, and the white guy got 2 years. And so I was like, what is it? And it happened 11 years ago. So people were like, where did this come from? Because there was no source.
Mm-hmm.
So I Googled it, and I found the judge in Florida. And in 2016, 4 years ago, there was an article about him, and it had listed, it was a project done by this newspaper in Florida about all of these different cases he had and all of these different times. So I used my best, like, you know, privileged white woman voice, and I wrote a strongly worded email to his assistant. And I was like, I realize no one may ever see this, but, you know, what are the reasons behind this and this and this and this? And, you know, I suggested a bunch of other people do so, because I was like, I mean, if a lot of people get on him for his history and stuff like that, make a stir, you know. And I also suggested to donate to the what's called the Equal Justice Initiative. Brian Stevenson, the guy from Just Mercy, started it and stuff. So like, yeah, there's a lot of this stuff out there, and you can do things from home and stuff like that. But
Or I'm gonna take off my ILS hat, or we just burn it all down and like start over. Put my ILS hat back on.
That sounds good. So Tiffany shared a website. She said it might not be the best to look up information about judges, but she did provide a website that you can do some research.
Yeah, so that,
oh, sorry.
Oh no, I just
Go
want to say
ahead.
that website, that's all public court documents. I have like special attorney access, so I don't know what the public facing one looks like, but you can see a lot of information on that generally, but it can be hard to search if you don't sort of like know the keys. There's also another website that has court information called DocsPop. They have only a certain number of searches per month, but we one time emailed them just to ask. So we had a client, I'm going to tell the story. I don't know how much time I have. She was in her car sleeping because she was homeless, and the police knocked on the window and they said, "What is your name?" And she said, "My name is Jane Doe," and gave her ID, which said John Doe. And then they arrested her and charged her with something called synthetic identity theft deception, which is where I can pull up what exactly it means, but it's basically like you intend to defraud someone by like concealing your identity. And I wrote to her criminal attorney and I was like, "Hi, let me explain to you about name changes. There's a thing called common law name change." Also, she gave the name she goes by. She gave the name on her work badge. She gave the name that was an alias in one of her other criminal cases. Like, she definitely is giving you her name, but the case continues. And so we were like, "How often is this happening?" And we just emailed this other website and was like, "Can you send us data about this?" And they just gave us like a Excel spreadsheet with every court case where this was a charge, so we could look it up and sort of see what was going on.
So you mentioned DocsPop. Can you spell that? I'm trying to include all this stuff. Newsletter.
I think it's just DocsPop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Also, like as just community advocates, freedom of information requests are always our friends. You can get a lot of really good information that way.
Can I just say also that part of what we're talking about is this really asymmetric situation where like a lot of liberal groups don't do this stuff because they're really reluctant to politicize the judiciary and they're concerned about rule of law. But at the same time, we know that hardcore conservatives groups are not concerned about any of that stuff at all. And sort of the Trump judges have like lifted sort of the last veil on that. Because he so clearly appointed people only for their views and not their qualifications when they were deemed incompetent and stuff like that. And they're some of the worst judges now. And so I feel like national groups are starting to do some stuff about at least the federal judges, but they're really careful and cautious and reluctant to say bad things about judges for that exact reason. It's that asymmetric thing where like you don't want to destroy the rule of law by claiming that all the judges just vote their opinions and not look at the law. But actually in Indiana, we have that, right? That's actually the case. Like you were pointing out, there's so many cases where the law says one thing and the judges do something different and they know they can get away with it and they can say bigoted things and get away with that. So I just wanted to like talk, sort of explain why the landscape is so skewed on this. But I guess another thing I was thinking is instead of starting with DocsPop and stuff like that, maybe we could reach out to organizations like yours and say, tell us who you think are the 5 worst judges on name changes or LGBTQ issues. We can go to people working on abortion issues and say, who are the 5 or 10 worst judges or something. And we could put together the list by looking at those issues rather than pouring through each judge's record, I think.
That's true. I would be prohibited from saying that. But if we like had coffee and I randomly mentioned 5 judges.
Or if I were to say, if we were to bring a case, which judges go in front of.
Another thing too, Shruti, is, we know as attorneys, we know a lot of other attorneys in town. And so I actually was interviewed by the Indiana Daily Student about some of the judicial candidates that ran for judge during the primary we just had. And I didn't have anything to say because I've only been here for a couple of years and I don't know these people personally. But as soon as I got off the phone with the IDS lawyer and I just mentioned it to the IDS reporter, and I mentioned it to some of my lawyer friends in town, they were like, they had tons of things to say. So, I mean, we want to be careful about, slandering or libeling anybody, but we have resources we're winning against some kind of attorney they are, or you can look them up on the bar website and see, has this person been disciplined and what have they been disciplined for? Or, this person's been working, for the prosecutor's office and what kind of, when they're the attorney of record, not that the deputy prosecutor always gets to make the decision themselves, but if they're the attorney of record on the case, and how have they dealt with people? Have they dealt disparately with people of different backgrounds? I mean, we can find that stuff out. We can learn that, and we can help inform our group at least about what we can learn.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it's not slander when you quote their own cases.
Right, exactly.
Around it. So
All right. Well, it is a little after 1:30, so I did write down the two websites that were suggested for looking up information, and I will make sure that those get in our meeting minutes, and those will go out in our newsletter. So if anyone has anything else. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
I just want to introduce myself. This is my first meeting. I just joined last week. My name is Rebecca Willig. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. And I just wanted to let you guys know that I'm really happy to find an organization like this here. I've seen what you've been doing. I can look online and see some things that were posted on Facebook and the activism that I've seen. So my daughter and I moved here from Fort Wayne in 2016. So I just wanted to briefly introduce myself and say thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate being in this circle of women. And Megan, I'm sorry that Indiana sucks, but we're all trying to make it better. I'm from Fort Wayne, and
I don't mean to be so negative.
You're-
I also have a lot of personal feelings about being dragged here from New York City that infect my perspective about everything.
But that's something that a lot of us who've left and then come back, you know, we see a little bit more clearly. Like, I grew up in a microcosm of conservative Christianity. I sat in churches where we had Republican senator candidates come through and tell us why we were being good Christians by voting one way or another. So most of the people here in this state, I believe, are just very, they've been lied to for so long that the truth sounds like an injurious lie to what they hold very dear. So it's one of those things where we just got to keep chipping away, but it might not be in our lifetime that we see the fruits of this labor. So that's just something that I'm here to start doing rather than just being a Facebook like and lover. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to introduce myself and say thank you guys.
Thanks, Rebecca. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Hey, Megan, quick question. Are you married to Abby Katz?
We are not married, but yes.
Not married, but
did
are
you grow up
partners?
with her? Yeah.
Yeah. I did some theater with her, but also I went to Beth Shalom growing up.
Oh, okay.
And my little sister Abby as well is friends with Mimi.
Oh, I'm gonna write your name down so when I go downstairs.
I think we did theater together like when I was a teenager and stuff like that. I think I might be a couple of years younger, but we definitely know like all the same people.
That's I will definitely, yes. My partner is from here and I've never lived here. And so every person I meet is like, oh, I know either your partner or one of her four sisters. Like, it's just every connection I've ever made at Bloomington is like through the Katz family.
I just moved back to Bloomington almost a year ago. I lived in California for 15 years in Los Angeles. So I'm readjusting to Indiana as well. But I'm glad to live in Bloomington as opposed to the rest of Indiana.
Yeah.
Amen.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Megan, and
thank you for having me.
This has been really an awesome discussion.
For sure.
Thank you. Bye. I'm going to leave. Bye, guys.
Bye,
Megan. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Mandy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a good afternoon.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody. Great to see you.
All right. Have a good rest of your weekend. Bye.